it all stood on a stage bathed in golden light. His beautiful 7 months pregnant wife, Gabriel, watched from the front table, her smile as radiant as the diamonds at her throat. But the speech he was about to give wasn't one of gratitude. It was a declaration of war. He thought he was seizing his freedom and exposing a loveless marriage, but he was actually signing his own eviction notice from a kingdom he never knew he didn't rule. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a catastrophic miscalculation, and the day a quiet heiress decided to collect on a debt of betrayal, proving that the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. The air in the Beaumont Forrester penthouse on Park Avenue was always still conditioned to a perfect 72 degrees. It was a stillness Gabrielle Beaumont had once mistaken for peace. Now, in the 3rd year of her marriage to Lachlan Forrester and the 7th month of her pregnancy, she knew it was the sound of a vacuum. It was the sound of space growing between two people who shared a 10,000 square foot home, but could no longer stand to be in the same room. Lachlan was a man sculpted by ambition. He wasn't born to money, but he wore it like a second skin, one he'd acquired through their marriage. His Forrester Foundation, a philanthropic venture aimed at funding tech startups, was his pride and joy. It gave him a name, a purpose that wasn't directly tied to the colossal Beaumont global empire, the source of their unimaginable wealth. Gabriel's father, Robert Beaumont, had built the logistics and shipping conglomerate from the ground up. Lachlan ran a small, flashy subsidiary of it, a position Robert had created specifically for him. Gabriel saw the change in him over the last year. The late nights he excused as investor meetings, the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to his suit jackets the way his phone was always angled away from her. He had become dismissive, treating her pregnancy more as an inconvenience than a shared joy. When she'd try to talk about names for their son, he'd wave a hand impatiently. "Anything you want, Gabriel. You're better at that stuff." Her attempts to connect were met with a wall of polite indifference. He saw her as fragile decorative, the quiet, gentle heiress who managed their homes in the Hamptons and Aspen, who planned the menus and approved the flower arrangements. He had no idea that while he was playing CEO of his pet project, she was the one on bi-weekly calls with the family office, a team of 20 analysts and accountants who managed the true source of their lifestyle. He had no idea that her quiet time in the library was spent reviewing quarterly reports for Beaumont Global, the company her ailing father had long ago entrusted to her stewardship. Lachlan saw the river of money, but had never once thought to ask about its source. He simply assumed that by marrying her, he had married it. Tonight was the Forrester Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of Lachlan's year. It was the one night he felt he was truly the master of his universe, doling out charity and influence. He stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting the bow tie of his Tom Ford tuxedo. "How do I look?" he asked, not turning to face her. Gabriel sat on the edge of their vast bed, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach. She wore a deep emerald gown that complemented her auburn hair. "You look very handsome, Lachlan." "This night has to be perfect," he muttered, more to his reflection than to her. "We're honoring Blake Harding's new AI venture. I need the press to be all over it. This is what solidifies my name in this city." "My name," he'd said. "Not our name." She noted the slip, filing it away with 100 others. "Everything is arranged," she said softly. "The catering is confirmed, the seating chart is finalized, and the security detail is in place." He finally turned a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "I know. Need to be on my A-game. Try to look happy tonight, will you? The investors get nervous when you look so pensive. The condescension was a familiar sting. He was telling her how to perform her role as his wife. She gave a small, serene smile, a mask she had perfected over the past few months. Of course, dear. I wouldn't dream of making your investors nervous. As they rode the private elevator down to the waiting town car, Lachlan was scrolling furiously through his phone, a tight, secretive smile on his face. Gabriel watched the lights of the city blur past the window. She knew he wasn't messaging his business partner, Blake. She knew because a private investigator's report was currently sitting in a locked drawer in her desk. A report filled with photographs, hotel receipts, and transcripts of text messages between her husband and a woman named Katya Petrova, a ruthlessly ambitious VP from a rival firm. The report had confirmed her fears, but it had also ignited something else, a cold, hard resolve. She had hoped for the sake of their unborn child that it was a fleeting mistake, that the man she once loved was still in there somewhere. But his cruelty, his blatant disrespect, had chipped away at that hope until nothing was left but dust. Tonight, she would play her part one last time. She would be the perfect supportive wife. She would smile for the cameras on the red carpet, a vision of maternal grace. And she would let Lachlan have his moment on stage. She had a feeling it would be the last one he ever had. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers weighing thousands of pounds each cast a diamond-like shimmer over the city's elite. The air hummed with power, the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of conversations about stock prices and summering in St. Bart's. Gabriel navigated the room with an effortless grace, her hand a constant reassuring presence on her stomach. She accepted congratulations on the baby-deflected questions about her due date and smiled until her cheeks ached. Lachlan was in his element, his hand always on the small of her back in a proprietary gesture for the cameras, but his eyes were constantly scanning the room. She knew who he was looking for. And then she saw her. Katya Petrova. She was everything Gabriel was not. Sharp, angular, with platinum blonde hair cut in a severe bob, and a blood-red dress that clung to her like a promise. She held a champagne flute like a weapon and laughed a little too loudly. She was positioned near the main stage, a clear sign of premeditation. Lachlan's eyes met Katya's for a fraction of a second, and a silent, charged conversation passed between them. In that moment, Gabriel knew this night was not just about his foundation. It was a coup. She took her seat at the head table, flanked by Lachlan's partner, Blake Harding, and his wife. Blake was a decent man, if a bit weak-willed, and he looked at Gabriel with genuine warmth. "You're glowing, Gabriel. Motherhood suits you." "Thank you, Blake," she replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The dinner service was a blur. Speeches were made, awards were given, and through it all, Gabriel felt a strange sense of calm detachment, as if she were watching a film of someone else's life. Finally, the moment arrived. The Master of Ceremonies introduced the man of the hour. "Ladies and gentlemen, the visionary founder of the Forrester Foundation, please welcome Mr. Lachlan Forrester." A slickly produced video played on the massive screens, showcasing Lachlan shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons at tech incubators, and looking thoughtfully at blueprints. It was a monument to his ego. He strode onto the stage to thunderous applause, his face beaming with a conqueror's smile. He began with the usual platitudes, thanking the donors, the board, and the staff. Gabriel watched him, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. She noticed his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. This wasn't just a speech. It was a performance he had rehearsed. "Tonight is about the future," Lachlan boomed, his voice resonating with manufactured passion. "It's about breaking free from the old ways of thinking, from the constraints that hold us back, and embracing a bold, authentic vision." A nervous energy rippled through the room. This was not the standard charity gala speech. For too long. He continued, his eyes scanning the crowd and deliberately avoiding hers. "I have lived a life that was expected of me. I have worn the suit, played the part, and maintained a facade for the sake of tradition and appearance." The murmuring grew louder. Gabriel felt hundreds of pairs of eyes shift towards her. She kept her expression placid, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "But authenticity demands courage," he declared. "And I can no longer in good conscience live a lie. The partnership that many of you believe defines me has been a gilded cage, a marriage based not on passion or mutual respect, but on a business-like arrangement." A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Blake Harding shot a horrified look at Gabriel, who simply stared at the stage, her face an unreadable mask. Lachlan was doing this. He was actually doing this. A man cannot build an empire of truth from a foundation of lies, he said, his voice dripping with self-righteousness. He then did the unthinkable. He gestured to the side of the stage. "And I have found someone who shares my vision for an authentic life, someone who inspires me, who challenges me, and with whom I can build a real future." Katya Petrova, her red dress like a slash of blood against the dark stage, walked out from the wings. She took Lachlan's hand, her chin held high in defiance. The camera flashes were blinding, a fusillade of explosions, capturing the tableau of betrayal. Lachlan looked directly at the front table, his gaze finally landing on his pregnant wife. His expression was not one of remorse, but of cold, hard triumph. "And so tonight I am announcing my separation from my wife, Gabriel," he said, the microphone amplifying his cruelty. "And I want to make one thing perfectly clear to quell any future speculation." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the poison hang in the air. "This decision is mine alone. I will not be beholden to a family that views me as nothing more than a glorified employee, or to a woman whose coldness and disinterest have made our home a mausoleum. I am choosing a life of passion and truth." The final unspoken insinuation was the most vile. He was questioning her, her character, her very contribution to their life in front of everyone they knew. He was painting her as a frigid, unloving heiress he was heroically escaping. The humiliation was absolute, public, and designed to shatter her. The room was utterly silent. The shock was so profound that even the photographers had lowered their cameras. In that silence, Gabriel did something no one expected. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't flee the room in shame. Slowly, deliberately, she rose to her feet. The spotlight, still focused on the stage, caught the emerald of her dress and the fire in her eyes. She held Lachlan's triumphant gaze for a long, unbroken moment. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of defeat. It was a nod of acknowledgement, a confirmation, message received. With the dignity of a queen, she turned her back on the stage, on her husband and his mistress, and walked. She didn't run. She walked, her head held high, past the tables of stunned onlookers, past the horrified faces of their friends, her hand resting protectively on her unborn son. The only sound in the cavernous ballroom was the soft, steady click of her heels on the marble floor. each step a countdown to a reckoning Lachlan Forrester could never have imagined. Lachlan and Katya left the gala riding a wave of adrenaline and scandal. To them, it was a victory. They had seized control of the narrative, or so they believed. They spent the night at a suite Lachlan had booked at the Four Seasons, drinking champagne and celebrating their new beginning. They were so shocked they couldn't even speak. Katya laughed, tracing the lapel of his tuxedo. "You were magnificent. A lion." "It had to be done," Lachlan said, basking in her adoration. "I couldn't suffocate in that life for one more day. Now we can finally be together openly. The Forrester name will be associated with courage, not just Beaumont money." He envisioned the coming days as a simple, if messy, process. Lawyers would be called. Gabriel, being the private, timid person she was, would want a quiet, quick divorce. He'd be generous, of course. He'd let her keep the penthouse. It was too big for him and Katya, anyway. He'd give her a handsome settlement enough to silence any complaints. The bulk of the fortune, which he saw as the engine for his ambitions, would naturally be his to manage. He was the man of the family, the one with the vision. It was only right. The next morning he woke up feeling powerful. He ordered a lavish room service breakfast and decided to make a grand gesture. He called the top real estate broker in the city. "Jonathan, it's Lachlan Forrester," he said, his voice booming. "I'm in the market for a new home. Something downtown, a statement penthouse. Price is no object, and I need it fast." While he was on the phone, Katya was online filling a virtual shopping cart at Net-a-Porter with a celebratory wardrobe. The total ran into the tens of thousands. "This will all go on the Centurion card, darling," she purred, looking up from her laptop. "Of course," Lachlan said dismissively. But when he went to make a down payment on a potential property, later that day, a wire transfer from his primary brokerage account, the transaction was denied. "Account access restricted," the message read. He frowned, annoyed. He called his private banker at Morgan Stanley. "Miss Forrester." "I'm sorry." The banker, a man named David, who had always been obsequious, sounded strangely formal. "There appears to be a hold on all outgoing transfers from your managed accounts. The instruction came from the family office this morning." "The family office," Lachlan scoffed. "That's a mistake. I am the family. Lift the hold immediately." "I can't do that, sir. The authorization has to come directly from the sole principal trustee of the Beaumont Trust." "Gabriel," Lachlan laughed in disbelief. "She wouldn't know how to place a hold on an account if her life depended on it. Put me through to your supervisor." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Gabriel was not at the penthouse weeping into a pillow. She was in a quiet, sunlit conference room in the offices of Chen Wexler and Associates. Her lawyer, Audrey Chen, a woman with a mind as sharp as her tailored suits, sat across from her. On the table between them were stacks of documents, binders, financial statements, and a copy of the prenuptial agreement Lachlan had signed without a second glance 3 years ago. Gabriel was calm, her voice even. The gala was illuminating. Audrey nodded, her expression grim. Public humiliation. It's a classic narcissist's move. But it also gives us everything we need. The infidelity clause in the prenup is now indisputably triggered. Clause 12, Section B. In the event of a public act of infidelity causing reputational harm to the Beaumont name, it renders the standard settlement provisions null and void. "Good," Gabriel said simply. "First, I want all his corporate cards frozen. His access to the joint accounts, which are funded exclusively by the trust, is to be revoked. The staff at the Penthouse, the Hamptons House, and the Aspen Chalet now report only to me. His name is to be removed from the flight manifests for the private jet. Change all the security codes on the properties. He is not to be granted access. Audrey made notes, her pen flying across a legal pad. Consider it done. The team at the Beaumont family office is already executing. The Forrester Foundation, Gabriel continued, her voice turning to ice. It's funded by an annual grant from a Beaumont charitable fund, correct? Entirely, Audrey confirmed. It has no other source of income. Cut it, immediately. And I want a full independent audit of its expenses for the last 3 years. I have a feeling Mr. Forrester's charity has been quite charitable to himself. A small, predatory smile touched Audrey's lips. I like where this is going. He holds the title of Executive VP at Beaumont Global's tech subsidiary. His position is to be terminated effective immediately. Security is to escort him from the building if he shows up. A courier will deliver his personal effects to wherever he might be staying. Gabriel paused, taking a sip of water. She looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. The empire her father had built, the one she quietly managed and protected. Lachlan had seen it as his personal piggy bank, a stage for his ambitions. He had disrespected her, but far worse, he had disrespected her family's legacy. He had underestimated her, and for that there would be no forgiveness. He believes he is a king who has just left his queen. Gabriel said, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with steel. He is about to find out he was never more than a court jester, and the court is officially closed. The first 24 hours were a series of frustrating glitches for Lachlan. The rejected wire transfer, his corporate American Express being declined when he tried to pay for a celebratory dinner for Katya and a few sycophantic friends. The hotel concierge informing him apologetically that his suite, which he had assumed was booked indefinitely, was only secured for 1 night, and the card on file was no longer valid. It's just administrative chaos because of the announcement, he assured a suddenly quiet Katya, swiping a personal credit card with a much lower limit to cover the hotel bill. Gabriel is probably having a fit, and her people are lashing out. It'll be sorted by tomorrow. But it wasn't sorted. The next morning, when he tried to go to his office at the Beaumont Global Tower, his keycard flashed red. Access denied. The security guard at the front desk, a man who had greeted him with a deferential "Good morning, Mr. Forrester," for 3 years, looked at him with an impassive, slightly pitying expression. "Sorry, sir. Your name isn't on the access list today." "What are you talking about? I'm an executive vice president." Lachlan snarled, his temper starting to fray. "I have an order here, sir, from corporate headquarters." The guard was unmoving. A moment later, a junior HR employee appeared carrying a single cardboard box. "Mr. Forrester," the young woman said, avoiding his eyes. "These are your personal effects. A courier was meant to deliver them." Humiliation washed over him, hot and sickening. He was being fired from a position created for him. He snatched the box and stormed out of the lobby, the sound of his own furious breathing loud in his ears. He drove, or rather was driven, to the penthouse, planning to confront Gabriel. He would yell, he would demand, he would force her to stop this childish tantrum. But when his driver Miguel dropped him at the curb, the doorman, who usually greeted him with a wide smile, stepped forward to block his path. "I'm sorry, Mr. Forrester. I can't let you up." "What the hell are you talking about, Frank? I live here. My instructions are clear." Frank set his face a stony mask. "From Mrs. Beaumont, Forrester. Only she and authorized guests are permitted entry." "She's not a Forrester anymore. I'm a Forrester." "This is my home," he raged. "The deed is in the name of the Beaumont Trust, sir," Frank said quietly, but with unshakable finality. The pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a picture so monstrously wrong, so contrary to his entire worldview, that he could barely comprehend it. The accounts, the job, the house. Could it all be tied to her no impossible? It was her father's, and he was her husband. It was his, by extension. He just needed to talk to her. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail, a dozen more times. Each unanswered call fueled his mounting panic. Katya was not helping. Her initial excitement had curdled into a sullen anxiety. "What is going on, Lachlan?" she demanded, when he returned to their new, much less impressive hotel room. "My cards are being declined now too. The supplemental ones you gave me." "It's a temporary issue," he snapped. "A tactic. She's trying to scare me." "Well, it's working." Katya shot back, her voice brittle. "I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for the man on the stage, at the gala, the king of the city, not someone who gets locked out of his own office." Desperate, he called Blake Harding, his business partner. "Blake, you have to help me. Gabriel has lost her mind. She's freezing everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Lachlan, I got a call this morning from the auditors for the Beaumont Trust." "The auditors? What about?" "They're investigating the Forrester Foundation's finances," Blake said, his voice heavy. "They're asking about discrepancies. The villa rental in Tuscany last summer, the consulting fees paid to that offshore company. Lachlan, they know. They know you've been using the foundation as your personal expense account." The blood drained from Lachlan's face. He sank onto the edge of the cheap hotel bed. Those weren't just discrepancies. It was fraud. He had funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, confident that no one would ever look closely. He had assumed Gabriel signed the checks without a thought. "This is her doing," he whispered, the full scope of the attack finally dawning on him. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a demolition. He tried one last desperate gambit. He drove his car, one of the few things he thought was truly his, to the family office, a discreet brownstone on the Upper East Side that housed the nerve center of the Beaumont empire. He was going to confront the managers, the accountants, the people who moved the money. He was met at the door by a security guard and a small, impeccably dressed woman with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. It was Audrey Chen. "Mr. Forrester," she said, her tone dripping with mock politeness. "I believe you're lost. This is private property. I need to speak to whoever is in charge," he demanded, trying to push past her. Audrey didn't move. "I'm in charge of this particular matter, and I'm afraid we have nothing to discuss with you directly. All future communications will be through your legal counsel, should you manage to retain any." "My legal counsel? I don't need a lawyer. I need my money." Audrey let out a soft, pitying laugh. "Oh, Mr. Forrester, that seems to be the fundamental and, I must say, catastrophic misunderstanding you've been operating under for the past 3 years. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You don't have any money." He stared at her, dumbfounded. "Everything, the houses, the cars, the accounts, your salary, the very air you breathe, has been a privilege extended to you by the Beaumont Trust, a privilege contingent on your role as husband to the Trust's sole controller and beneficiary. After your performance at the gala, that privilege has been permanently revoked. I believe the legal term is breach of contract. Now, if you don't leave, I will have you arrested for trespassing." She smiled brightly. "Have a lovely afternoon." As Lachlan stumbled back onto the street, the city he thought he owned suddenly felt alien and menacing. The car he had driven there was now being fitted with a boot, a grinning tow truck driver already hooking it up. It wasn't his car. It was registered to the trust. Of course it was. Everything was. He was a fraud, a parasite, and the host had finally decided to starve him out. Lachlan managed to scrape together enough money from his last valid credit card to hire a lawyer. Not a top-tier shark from a major firm. They all politely declined to represent him, citing conflicts of interest with the Beaumont Empire, but a hungry second-rate divorce attorney named Sid Heller, who operated out of a cramped office in Midtown. Sid listened to Lachlan's tirade with a weary expression. "So let me get this straight," he said, rubbing his temples. "You publicly humiliated the granddaughter of one of the richest men in the country who also happens to be your pregnant wife, and you're surprised she's playing hardball." "It's not hardball, it's theft," Lachlan insisted. "Half of everything is mine. Marital assets. That's the law." "Did you sign a prenuptial agreement?" Sid asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes, but it's just a formality. A standard document." Sid sighed. "There is no such thing as a standard document with the Beaumont family, Mr. Forrester. Let me make some calls." A meeting was arranged. Not a negotiation, Audrey Chen's assistant had been careful to specify, but a presentation of terms. It was to be held at Audrey's firm. Katya insisted on coming her face a mask of anxiety and entitlement. "This is my future too," she'd said. "I need to know what we're getting." They walked into the conference room, and the power imbalance was immediate. On one side of the vast mahogany table sat Lachlan Katya and the beleaguered Sid Heller. On the other side sat Audrey Chen, flanked by two stone-faced senior partners and a forensic accountant. Gabriel was not present. Her absence was a statement in itself. She didn't need to be there. This was a simple corporate execution. Audrey began without preamble, her voice as cool and crisp as a winter morning. "Thank you for coming. We've convened this meeting to clarify Mr. Forrester's financial position post-separation to avoid any further confusion." She gestured to the accountant, who placed a thick bound document in front of Sid Heller. "This is a summary of the asset structure," Audrey said. "Let me break it down for you. The penthouse, the properties in the Hamptons and Aspen, the art collection, the fleet of vehicles and the private aircraft are not marital assets. They are, and always have been, the sole property of the Beaumont Trust, established by Robert Beaumont in 2010. She slid a second document across the table. "This is the Trust's charter. Please turn to page 47, Article 9, Section 4. It names the sole lifetime beneficiary and trustee with absolute and indisputable control over all assets and disbursements." She paused, letting her words sink in. "That person is Gabriel Beaumont." Lachlan stared at the page, the legal jargon swimming before his eyes. Trustee beneficiary. He had always thought of Gabriel's father as the one pulling the strings. "My father-in-law," he stammered. "Robert Beaumont retired from active management years ago due to his health," Audrey said, cutting him off. "He passed full control to Gabriel upon her 25th birthday. Your wife, the woman you thought was planning dinner parties, has been the de facto CEO of this entire fortune for the last 5 years. Your salary, your foundation's funding, your expense accounts. Every dollar you have ever touched since you met her has been in essence an allowance. An allowance she personally approved." The air left Lachlan's lungs. He felt Katya stiffen beside him. "Now let's move on to the prenuptial agreement." Audrey continued, her tone becoming even more severe. "The one Mr. Forrester signed without reading. While it provided a generous lump sum settlement in the event of a no-fault divorce, it also contained Clause 12, Section B, the public infidelity clause. She read the clause aloud, her voice ringing with legal authority. It was brutally specific, detailing how any public act of cheating that brought shame or unwanted media attention to the Beaumont name would render all settlement obligations void. It also triggered a clawback provision on all gifts and non-essential expenditures valued over $50,000 made during the final year of the marriage. "The gala," Sid Heller whispered, looking pale. "He triggered the clause on live television." "In spectacular fashion," Audrey agreed with a thin smile. "Therefore, Mr. Forrester is entitled to nothing. No settlement, no property, no alimony." She wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the preliminary audit of the Forrester Foundation has uncovered significant financial malfeasance. We have documented over $1.2 million in embezzled funds disguised as consulting fees, travel expenses, and charitable donations to shell companies. We are prepared to turn this evidence over to the district attorney's office and pursue criminal charges." Lachlan felt the room tilt. Prison. They were threatening him with prison. "However," Audrey said, leaning forward, "Ms. Beaumont is a pragmatic woman. She has no desire for a messy public criminal trial, especially with her son due to be born soon. So she is prepared to offer a one-time deal." She slid a single piece of paper across the table. "You will sign a full confession of the embezzlement to be held in escrow by this firm. You will relinquish any and all claims to any Beaumont-related asset. You will agree to a permanent restraining order, keeping you at least 500 feet from Gabriel and her child. You will sign the divorce papers today, citing irreconcilable differences. In exchange, we will not pursue criminal charges, and we will not activate the clawback clause on your personal effects. You will be allowed to walk away with the clothes on your back and whatever is left in your personal bank account, which I believe amounts to less than $20,000. It was a total annihilation, a complete and utter stripping of his life, his identity, and his future. He looked at Katya. Her face was a storm of fury and disbelief. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have got to be kidding me," she hissed. Her eyes locked on Lachlan. "This is what I left my career for. For nothing. You told me you were a king. You're not even a pawn. You're the dirt the pawn stands on." She grabbed her purse. "Don't you ever contact me again." She spat at Lachlan, her voice filled with venom. Then she turned to Audrey Chen. "And for the record, I was just as much a victim here. He lied to me." With that, she turned and stormed out of the conference room, her heels clicking an angry retreat from the ruins of Lachlan's life. He was left alone, staring at the document that was his only escape from total desolation. He had publicly humiliated his wife to gain his freedom and a passionate new life. Now he had lost his wife, his mistress, his job, his homes, his reputation, and every cent he had ever believed was his. His freedom was the empty, terrifying freedom of a man with absolutely nothing left to lose. The signing took place not in a grand boardroom, but in the cramped, overheated office of Sid Heller, a space that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. Lachlan sat opposite his lawyer. The documents that represented the complete surrender of his former life spread across the cluttered desk. Each page he initialed felt like a small death. When he came to the final signature line on the divorce decree, his hand hovered over the paper, the pen trembling. He looked up at Sid, a wild, pleading look in his eyes, as if this second-rate attorney held some key to undoing it all. Sid Heller, a man who had seen every shade of marital ruin, simply pushed the document an inch closer. "There's no other move, Lachlan," he said, his voice flat. You played the hand. This is the result. With a ragged exhale, Lachlan scrawled his name. The signature was a jagged, angry thing, a stark contrast to the confident flourish he had once cultivated. It was the signature of a ghost. The moment he lifted the pen, the finality of it washed over him, cold and absolute. It was done. Sid Heller patted his back with a synthetic show of sympathy before sliding his own invoice across the desk, a bill that would vaporize nearly half of Lachlan's meager remaining funds. He was paying a premium to be professionally filleted. The public fallout was as swift as it was merciless. Lachlan had wanted the spotlight at the gala, and now he had it, though it was the harsh, unflattering glare of public ridicule. Gossip columns ran headlines that dripped with schadenfreude, Forrester's folly, how a titan became a footnote, and the billion-dollar betrayal, heiress Gabriel Beaumont plays the ultimate trump card. He became a punchline in the elite circles he had fought so hard to conquer, a cautionary tale told over champagne and canapes. The shunning was visceral. He saw a former colleague, a man with whom he'd shared cigars and backroom deals across the street. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Lachlan saw a flicker of recognition, then panic, and the man abruptly turned to study a shop window with intense interest until Lachlan had passed. An email to his supposed best friend, Blake Harding, went unanswered. His phone, once a relentless torrent of calls and messages, was now a silent, mocking brick in his pocket. His attempts to find work were a masterclass in humiliation. The name Forrester, which he had so desperately wanted to solidify, was now radioactive. At interviews, he could feel the shift in the room the moment the hiring manager connected him to the scandal. The polite sarsolds would tighten, the questions would become perfunctory. He received a string of carefully worded rejections, overqualified, not the right fit, pursuing other candidates. The message was clear. The world of high finance was a closed loop, fiercely loyal to the true sources of power, and he had committed the cardinal sin of attacking one of its own. His dwindling funds forced him from a temporary hotel into a soulless, short-term rental in a run-down building in Queens. The culture shock was a physical blow. The silent, climate-controlled perfection of his former life was replaced by the constant noise of sins, the muffled arguments of his neighbors through paper-thin walls, and the persistent drip of a leaky faucet in the stained bathroom sink. He'd once looked out his window onto the sweeping majesty of Central Park. Now his view was a brick wall and a rusted fire escape. Each day was a grinding reminder of the altitude of his fall. One rainy, miserable evening, festering in his squalid apartment, a desperate, irrational hope took root. The baby, their son. He was the one thing that still connected them, a biological fact that no lawyer could erase. Clinging to this last shred of a shared history, he took the subway back to Manhattan, the journey feeling like a pilgrimage to a life that was no longer his. He stood across the street from the grand canopy of his former home, a hunched figure in a cheap, darkening coat. He watched as a gleaming town car, his former town car, pulled up, and Gabriel emerged. Even from a distance, pregnant and wrapped in a cream-colored coat, she radiated a serene, untouchable power. The doorman. Frank rushed to hold an umbrella over her, greeting her with a warmth and deference that twisted Lachlan's insides. He waited until she was safely inside before he crossed the street, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pressed the buzzer for the penthouse. After a long moment, the intercom crackled to life. It was her voice, clear and steady, with no trace of surprise. "What do you want, Lachlan?" The sound of it, so calm and controlled, unnerved him. "Gabriel, please," he begged, his voice cracking. the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "I just want to talk. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. But please, think about our son. He needs his father." The silence that followed stretched for an eternity, filled only by the hiss of the rain on the pavement. He could picture her in the warm, opulent lobby, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach, considering his pathetic plea. When she finally spoke, her voice was devoid of all emotion. It was not angry, not sad, just finished. "You are mistaken, Lachlan. The man you were pretending to be the man I married might have been a father. The man who stood on that stage, who tried to annihilate my character, to justify his own infidelity, is not. My son will have a father figure in his life, strong, honorable men who will teach him about integrity and respect. You are not equipped to teach him those things. Gabriel, I can change." "No," she cut in the word, as sharp and final as a guillotine's blade. "You cannot. You had your chance to be a husband and a father, and you publicly resigned from both roles. He will not need you, but he will know of you. You are not a father. You are a lesson my son will learn about the kind of man he should never become." There is nothing more to say. Goodbye, Lachlan. The intercom clicked off, severing the last thread between them. He stood there for a long time, the rain washing over him, a hollowed-out man erased from his own story. While Lachlan's world was shrinking to the size of a single, miserable room, Gabriel's was expanding exponentially. She did not retreat. She did not hide. She pivoted. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, she walked into the Beaumont Global boardroom. The air was thick with skepticism. The board consisted of powerful older men who had known her since she was a child. They saw her as Robert's delicate daughter, Lachlan's wronged wife. They were expecting a grieving heiress, perhaps a request for a leave of absence. Instead, they met a queen claiming her throne. She strode to the head of the table, her pregnancy a symbol not of vulnerability, but of legacy and continuation. She did not speak of the divorce. She spoke of the future. With cool, irrefutable logic, she laid out a breathtakingly ambitious 5-year plan, complete with market analysis, risk assessments, and revenue projections. She spoke of AI-driven logistics, of dominating the green energy shipping sector, of a corporate culture built on transparency and merit, not nepotism. The men around the table, initially patronizing, were stunned into swoons. Their expressions shifted from condescension to shock, and finally to a deep and profound respect. This was not Robert Beaumont's daughter. This was a leader in her own right, a brilliant strategist with a vision that was bolder than anything they had imagined. Her first official act was to sign the dissolution papers for the Forrester Foundation, citing the audit's findings of gross financial mismanagement. The next day, she announced its replacement, the Beaumont Legacy Initiative, a foundation with a staggering $50 million endowment dedicated to providing grants, childcare, and job training for single mothers. In her public statement, she said, "This initiative is for the women who, by choice or by circumstance, find themselves building a new future for their children with courage and dignity." The message was clear, elegant, and devastating. She had weaponized her own story, transforming her personal pain into a public force for good. She began converting Lachlan's cavernous home office, once a monument to his ego, into a light-filled nursery. As she directed painters and chose furniture, she was not just decorating a room. She was reclaiming her life, building a sanctuary of hope where a shrine to deceit had once stood. The betrayal had not broken her. It had been a crucible burning away the gentle, accommodating woman she had been taught to be, and revealing the formidable steel-cored leader she was always meant to become. 1 year later, the seasons had turned, washing the city in the crisp, golden light of early autumn. High atop the Beaumont Global Tower, the CEO's office was almost unrecognizable. The oppressive mahogany and dark, brooding leather of Robert Beaumont's era had been banished. In their place, a symphony of light oak, soft grey textiles, and brushed steel created an atmosphere of airy, forward-thinking calm. The only sound apart from the distant, muted hum of Manhattan was the happy gurgle of a baby and the soft clatter of wooden blocks on a plush wool rug. Gabrielle Beaumont sat on the floor, her tailored navy blue dress no impediment to playing with her 10-month-old son. Matthew, a cherubic boy with a shock of his mother's auburn hair and bright, curious eyes, let out a squeal of delight as he swiped a chubby hand through the block tower she had just built. He looked up at her, his mouth breaking into a wide, gummy smile, and her world, once fractured by betrayal, felt profoundly whole. In the year since Lachlan's spectacular self-immolation, Gabriel's name had become a legend in the financial world. They called her the Velvet Hammer on Wall Street, a quiet force whose strategic acquisitions and bold investments in sustainable logistics had sent Beaumont Global's stock soaring by an unprecedented 30%. Her philanthropic venture, the Beaumont Legacy Initiative, was not just a PR move, but a genuine force for change, celebrated for its tangible impact on the lives of single mothers across the state. She was a titan, a visionary, but here on the floor of her sun-drenched office, with the scent of baby powder in the air, she was simply Mama. Her assistant's voice, warm and respectful, came through the intercom. "Ms. Beaumont, your 2 o'clock is here. Mr. Harding." "Send him in." "Sarah," Gabriel replied effortlessly, rising and scooping Matthew into her arms. "And could you ask catering to bring up a bottle of warm milk, please?" Matthew's internal clock says it's almost time. "Of course, Miss Beaumont." A moment later, Blake Harding entered his posture, a mixture of gratitude and lingering awe. He still seemed slightly unnerved to be in this room, reporting to the woman whose life his former best friend had so publicly tried to destroy. After Lachlan's fall, Blake's promising AI venture had teetered on the brink of collapse, its funding pulled by spooked investors. Gabriel, in a move of stunning pragmatism, had swept in and acquired the company through Beaumont Global. She hadn't done it out of pity. She had done it because the technology was brilliant and she saw its potential. The acquisition saved the company, its employees, and Blake's career. "Gabriel, thank you for seeing me," he said, his gaze briefly touching on the contented baby in her arms before meeting hers. "Blake, please have a seat," she said with a genuine smile, settling into the armchair behind her expansive desk as Matthew chewed contentedly on her pearl necklace. "Let's talk about the Q3 projections. I was impressed by the efficiency gains in the automated sorting hubs, but I'm still seeing latency in the South American drone delivery network. What's the bottleneck?" For 20 minutes they delved into the minutiae of algorithms, supply chains, and market penetration. Blake, once intimidated, found himself energized by her sharp, incisive questions. She didn't just understand the balance sheets, she understood the technology on a fundamental level. She saw 3 steps ahead of everyone else. As the meeting concluded and Sarah entered with the warmed bottle, Blake hesitated, a shadow crossing his features. "Gabriel," he began, his voice dropping. "There's something else. I wasn't sure if I should even mention it." Gabriel paused in the act of settling Matthew more comfortably in her lap. She looked at Blake, her expression calm and patient, giving him the space to speak. "It's all right, Blake. You can tell me." He took a deep breath. "I saw him. I saw Lachlan." The name hung in the air for a moment, an artifact from a buried civilization. Gabriel's posture didn't change. She began to feed Matthew her movements, steady and serene. "Oh," she prompted softly. "Last night, I was walking home taking a different route through Hell's Kitchen. He's working as a bartender, in one of those dark, grim-looking dive bars. I almost didn't recognize him." Blake shook his head, a look of profound sadness on his face. He was wiping down the counter and his shoulders were stooped. He looked hollowed out, old, like all the light had gone out of him. Gabriel looked down at her son, at his tiny hand wrapped around her finger as he drank. A flicker of a memory surfaced, the crushing weight of humiliation in that ballroom, the cold fury in the lawyer's office, the lonely nights wondering if she was strong enough. She had been forged in that fire. Lachlan had simply been consumed by it. She searched within herself for any lingering emotion, anger, pity, the bitter tang of victory, and found only stillness. It wasn't a void, but a placid lake where a storm had once raged. The waves had stilled, the debris had sunk to the bottom, and the water was finally beautifully clear. Lachlan Forrester was no longer a character in her story. He was a ghost in someone else's, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. His downfall was not her triumph. Her triumph was this: the warmth of her child in her arms, the quiet hum of the powerful ethical company she was building, the knowledge that thousands of women were getting a second chance because of the foundation she had created from the ashes of her marriage. She finally looked up at Blake, her eyes clear and compassionate. "I hope he finds some peace, Blake," she said, and the sincerity in her voice was absolute. Her world was too full, too bright to be clouded by the shadows of the past. There was no room in it for hate. After Blake left, she walked to the vast window overlooking the city. The late afternoon sun set the skyline ablaze, casting long shadows that stretched across Central Park. Matthew finished with his bottle, rested his head on her shoulder, his breathing soft and even. She held him close, his small body a comforting weight against hers. He pointed a chubby finger at the sparkling tapestry of lights beginning to dot the landscape below. It was a kingdom of glass and steel, of commerce and dreams. Lachlan had craved it, had tried to steal his piece of it through her. He never understood that it wasn't something you could take. It was something you had to build. "Look, my love," she whispered, her lips brushing the top of his head. "Everything you see. We're going to make it better." It was a promise. An inheritance secured not by trusts and stock certificates, but by the unbreakable strength of a mother who had faced the worst of betrayals and had chosen not to seek revenge, but to build a legacy. She had taken the rubble of a broken life and built an empire of purpose on her own terms for the future she held safely in her arms. Gabriel Beaumont's story isn't just about revenge. It's a masterclass in quiet power and the profound miscalculation of underestimating the person right beside you. Lachlan Forrester saw a decorative wife. He was blind to the queen who controlled the entire kingdom. Her journey from public humiliation to absolute triumph serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the methodical, unseen force that realigns the world to its will. It's a testament to the idea that the greatest comebacks are born not from shouting, but from quiet, decisive action. If you were captivated by this story of betrayal, karma, and the rise of a true powerhouse, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. And for more tales of shocking twists and ultimate justice, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming next.